I'm Brad Sack. I'm director with Barr & Stennig. I'm also the leader of our construction group here in Indianapolis. On behalf of Barr & Stennig, USI, and Michaelis, thank you for spending some time with us today.
There's no good way to deliver bad news.
Feedback or something here.
It's not gonna be that.
Is that better? All right, that works.
Depends.
That works. So I guess a little bit about Barr & Stennig. We're a top 200 firm in the country. We are regionally based, but we have resources that span the globe. In addition to traditional accounting, review, audit, and tax work, we also offer our construction clients a number of other services such as wealth management, outsourced CFO services, business consulting, tax consulting, just to name a few. I guess a little bit of housekeeping here. So we do have a virtual audience in addition to those of us here in person. If you end up having a question for Cain as we progress here, we will have a microphone. If you could up a little higher here. Yeah. Here. Okay. If you have a question for Cain, just seek out our person with microphones so that the virtual audience can hear you ask those questions. And if you're attending here virtually and have a question for Cain, use the chat feature, just type a question in and we'll relay that on to Cain. If you are a CPA in need of CPE and you're here in person, there's a sign-in sheet. Just make sure you sign that. And if you are joining us virtually and would like CPE, there'll be a number of poll questions that pop up. Just make sure you answer those, and you may also need to disable your pop-up blocker. There should be instructions there on the site to do that so that you get those pop-up questions. And regardless, we'll send you out your CPE certificate here in the next couple days. So at this point, I would like to invite Kate up from ISA to say a few words. Make it hold it like right here, maybe.
You got it. All right. Well, hey, everybody. I'm Kate with Indiana Subcontractors Association, which is the largest subcontractor association in probably close to the country, but for sure Indiana. Coming up on March 9th, there is the Construction Networking Event of the Year. So if that is not on your calendar, if you're not aware of what that is, come find me after this and we'll chat about getting you registered. But we're super excited to be here. Barr & Stennig is one of our gold sponsors, so we're thrilled to be here to support them. Very brief remarks. If you have questions about ISA, come find me later. And with that, I'm handing things off to Larry with Michaelis.
Hello, everybody. My name is Larry Peterson with the Michaelis Corporation. Glad to be back. Glad to see some familiar faces. Glad to be sponsoring this along with the rest of the crew this year again. Make this short and sweet. If you ever need us on the emergency services restoration side, I'm fully aware of your construction and you can handle all of that. But on the water mitigation side, if you need us to come in, knock that job out for you, we'll get it done and then put it back in your court. And, you know, I look forward to meeting some of the new faces in here as well. Thanks for having us.
Anybody else introduce? No? Just the speaker?
No.
All right. So with over 7 years of experience in the construction industry, Cain has worked in a variety of disciplines in the E&C industry. He holds undergraduate degrees in business and construction management with from LSU. His career includes working as a project management for an electrical industrial contractor as well as a large GC. He went on to obtain his MBA with a concentration in finance and data analytics from the University of Denver. For the past 18 months, Cain has been a performance and operations consultant at FMI. His role involves assisting clients in developing and implementing strategies to enhance productivity and minimize risk. Cain is also committed to helping industry professionals make data-driven decisions and implement changes that lead to improved margins. Ladies and gentlemen, Cain Menard.
Morning. Hope everybody's enjoying this weather. I certainly am. You know, I'm from Louisiana, but I live in Denver now, and it's actually pretty cold in Denver compared to over here. So we never get any rain. So I'm welcoming this. This is kind of a nice change, to be honest with you. Let me just see if I can share this up on the right screen. One moment, sorry. There we go. Okay, so a little bit about FMI. So FMI has been working in the construction industry for about 70 years. It was founded by a man named Doc Fales about 70 years ago, who was a professor at the University of North Carolina. And he had a lot of platitudes, you know, but his main platitude regarding contractors was contractors do three things mainly. They get work, they win work, and they keep score. And so as we move forward into this next few years, you know, we hope that we can support contractors in determining how they can get work, how they can do work and execute successfully, and how they can keep score in a way that's conducive to training the next generation of contractors. So,
sorry to interrupt.
Hey.
Can you switch your screen? I think you're doing the extension versus the
extension.
Yeah, you're extending your display versus mirroring it on this on the Zoom. So
Sorry, one moment.
sorry for the technical difficulties.
I'm not sure how to do that.
Let's see.
So when I share my screen,
So I think if we exit out of the full screen of the Zoom. Sorry about this.
so they're not seeing this. What are they seeing?
Just a blank screen.
Hey, guys. I think you're good.
We're good. Okay, thanks, Ian. Sorry about that, y'all. Let's get back to it. Yeah, so like Brad said, I'm from Louisiana. I got my start in construction at a young age. My grandpa bought a number of houses after Katrina, and I helped him remodel them in New Orleans. And so I've been in the industry for a while, you know, from an unprofessional standpoint, probably about 15 years. But professionally, you know, I got my start in construction while I was in undergrad. I was earning a business degree, and I worked for a GC as an intern, primarily just filling up ice chests and getting trucks washed. But then, you know, I worked for Cabinet Builder. I actually worked with my hands. And then after graduating with an undergraduate degree in business, I went on to work for an industrial electrical and instrumentations contractor down in South Texas. It was actually a very good learning moment, because I don't know if any of you have worked on site in industrial projects, but you learn a lot in a very short amount of time, just by nature of being there. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I picked up quite a bit pretty fast. And then I went on to work for a large GC back in Louisiana for a few years. And they had an interesting rotational program where you go through in pre-construction, you go through work under a superintendent in the field, and then you work under a project manager. So I feel like I have a pretty well-rounded, while I don't have, you know, an extensive amount of experience like Jay Bowman. If you've ever worked with FMI, you've probably heard of Jay or know of Jay. But I feel like the variety of experiences I've had allows me to talk about these subjects pretty comfortably while having, you know, the legacy and history and the research of FMI backing up the data points we're pulling in this presentation. So, you know, as we get started, I just want to talk about what we'll be talking about today. So really what I'll be doing is tell you the data points first. You know, this is the data we've gathered. This is the research that we've done. And then the story around it. We build a story around the data for it to make sense in a way that's going along with the overall macroeconomic effects and headwinds of the economy. And then, you know, of course, we try to follow up with some recommendations on how best to approach the current situation and the story around the data. So there are three things to remember mainly about this quarterly update and forecast. And it's this idea of the new economy versus the old economy. Basically, it's that, you know, bulls and bears can coexist in any economic condition. You know, if you look at a forecast, you know, the way to think about a forecast of the construction industry, because it really is an aggregate of several different segments in one. But if you look at a monolithic forecast of the construction industry that can kind of give you an idea of where we're going. So 2022, 2023, we're seeing about a 3% decline across the board, every segment across the United States. But in order to make sense of that, you kind of have to pull apart the different segments and then the subsegments of those segments, and then kind of understand where to go from there. And then we'll be talking about geography as playing a major part of your opportunity, your landscape of opportunity as a contractor. You know, we're in the Midwest. I did pull some data for Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky specifically. I hope that's relevant to everyone here. So I'll be digging more into more local data as well. And then I'll talk about people and how increased project complexities are making it hard to execute work successfully, and how it's simultaneously getting harder to find people to do that work. Well, clicker's down. Okay, and so, you know, we've all read the news. We all follow the news. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of economic headwinds. There's a lot of different things that, depending on your source, will tell you different stories. And so we, you know, generally will pick a middle ground and say, okay, here's what these people are saying, and here's what this avenue is approaching it with. And so basically, we're in a world of VUCA, which is a consulting term. It's an acronym that means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you know, all of these economic headwinds can affect your landscape of opportunity moving forward. You know, we had some serious supply chain disruptions in 2020. Obviously, this was sparked by a supply and demand shock from overconsumption of goods compared to services than what we've historically seen. And you know, this led to a bottleneck in the global supply chain. While it's been subsiding over the recent year or so, we're still seeing the lasting effects of it in terms of cost of construction materials and lead times. So, you know, construction commodities, the cost increases are slowing. Things aren't getting cheaper to buy, but the increases are slowing. Things are still expensive, and contractors will have to be comfortable with doing less work for more cost. And so you have effects of fiscal and monetary policy, you know, with inflation kind of moderating, not necessarily getting any lower, but moderating after the Fed raised rates aggressively. They're starting to level out probably around 4.5% to 5%. And then asset prices are decreasing at the same time. We're seeing single family homes decreasing in value. We're seeing used and new cars decrease in value. And then the workforce, you know, this is a big pinch point with every company right now, with every contractor. It's getting harder to find skilled labor. It's getting hard to find any labor. And it seems like, you know, as the value of people's work is decreasing, the amount of work required to build something is increasing. And then, of course, there are other things like the dollar, there's export reductions, and then, you know, government regulation is getting a bit tighter with environmental and social governance regulations and that sort of thing. And so how do all these economic headwinds affect market confidence? And so what we're showing here are 4 indexes that FMI references a lot. First, the AIA, Architectural Billings Index. And this is a confidence index for designers. So designers typically look at the market 2 to 3 years down the line. And so they're determining what will the market look like in 2 to 3 years after we've already burned out this backlog that we have today. And, you know, designers are upstream in the construction pipeline. So this can be indicative of what the market will look like downstream. So in the last month, that confidence index has increased slightly, but still is under 50. So an important note to make here is that if you're above 50, all of these indexes are on 0 to 100. If you're above 50, that indicates expansion. If you're below 50, that indicates contraction. And so architects are they're the second least confident out of these indexes, and seem to be kind of moderating around right below where they're expecting growth. And so it's kind of iffy. It's more likely that they're expecting contraction than growth. However, in the Midwest, they're expecting, they're the most confident in the Midwest overall than they are in the West. For example, in the West, their confidence index is 45.5. In the Midwest, they're at about 49. So then we look at FMI's non-residential construction index, which is up by 0.1 since last quarter. So not really improving too much, and it's still below 100. And so it's been flat over the last 2 quarters, which means that they're relatively bearish in non-residential. And another important note to make here is that these confidence indexes are based off of our contractors' backlogs, the FMI ones at least. And so when we're working with our contractors, we get a feel of what everyone's backlogs are looking like in order to generate these indexes. And so then we look at the FMI's heavy civil index, which is actually above 50. People are pretty confident in heavy civil. It's up from the previous quarter, and it's relatively bullish compared to the others. And then we'll look at the Construction Industry Roundtable Index, which is a collection of some of the largest contractors and designers in the country who are working on some of the biggest projects in the country, and they're looking pretty good. They're at 53.3, and so they're feeling pretty confident that things are going to be good for them in mega projects, in heavy civil, and in all heavy civil projects across the board. And I'll go into more about why that is. But generally, confidence is sort of lagging behind. People are relatively less confident than they were a few years ago, but they're more confident that we aren't going to be sinking into a deep recession than we were maybe 4 to 6 months ago. And so here's that monolithic forecast that I was referring to earlier. This is total spending put in place for every segment of construction in all of the United States. And again, that's looking like there's going to be a 2 to 3% decline across the board in terms of spending of construction put in place. And so one way to think about this is kind of like the Dow. When you invest in the stock market, you can invest in a portfolio in the Dow, and your stocks might follow what the Dow is doing. But everybody has their own basket of stocks, and so yours actually might be performing well while the Dow itself is performing poorly. And so in order to really make sense of a monolithic forecast, again, we have to pull apart the different segments and geographies. So the overall point of this forecast here is that at face value, 2022 was the best year on record. However, when you look deeper into it and adjust it for inflation on a constant 2012 dollar basis, it's actually going to feel more like where we were in the year 2000, pre-2008 recession. And so really the construction market hasn't actually recovered since before 2008 and is struggling to recover today. But again, you need to pull apart those different segments within the monolithic forecast to make sense of what opportunities are still available. Because, well, the construction itself is a $1.7 trillion market. So there's always opportunity within there. You just have to be working in the right place and right segments. So if you look at residential, we're expecting a 21% contraction in the residential construction market over the next 5 years. Single family homes by itself is seeing a double-digit correction. However, multifamily homes is increasing by 1% over the next 5 years, according to our forecast. So we're seeing a massive correction in single family homes, and this is basically driven by a few reasons. One, home sales are falling in general. People are buying less homes as asset prices increase. While there's a record number of homes still being built today, and there's already an elevated housing inventory, this is kind of a recipe for disaster. People are buying less homes. There's a lot of homes being built, and there's already a lot of inventory. And so we expect that correction to to hit pretty hard in single family homes specifically. So that's also contributing to a plummeting National American Home Builders confidence index, plummeted from 77 out of 100 to 35 out of 100 just within a year from 2022 to 2023. And so then you look at non-residential, we're expecting an 8% growth in the next 5 years. And then non-building structures is expecting 32% growth in the next 5 years. And we're seeing double-digit growth in half of those sub-segments within non-building structures. And I'll dig more into that a little bit. And this is primarily driven by government spending, government funding, the IIJA, $500 billion of new spending on top of what was already there. And then also driven by onshoring activity from companies moving from places like Taiwan, where China's saber rattling is scaring people back to the United States. And so this is a Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky forecast. And they're different from the national numbers in that non-building represents a much larger share of the market than the national average. And given that residential takes up a smaller or the smallest market share in these 3 states, could we be insulated from a single family homes construction decline? That's something to be thinking about, as construction in single family homes in these 3 states is less than the national average. The monolithic forecast, the monolithic construction industry overall could be a little more insulated than the aggregate of the United States. So residential is seeing a 29% decrease overall in this forecast. Non-residential is seeing a 4% increase, and then non-building is seeing a 3% increase. So relatively flat, with the exception of a decrease in residential. And so once you start to peel apart, you look at the sub-segments of each segment. And if you were going to place a bet on any of these sub-segments, you'd start with understanding, okay, which sub-segments have the most market share, which are the largest in size compared to growth, right? So the largest market in the US is multifamily at 123 billion. So even though it's only growing at 1% over the next 5 years, there's still a lot of opportunity there. So office, if you look at office, we're expecting a 5% decline in the next 5 years of office, even though that's traditionally one of the fastest, the largest growing segment, largest growth segments. However, 20% of that segment is now made up of data centers, which will increase by 50% over the next 5 years, or is expected to increase by 50% over the next 5 years. So excluding data centers, offices will actually decline by about 35% over the next 5 years. It's a similar story in commercial. There's been a lot of slowed spending in commercial due to several reasons that we all know about, and primarily changes in consumer spending. So warehouses are also included in that commercial segment and represents about 50% of commercial. And so when you pull warehouses out of the commercial segment, that drop in construction spending put in place in commercial will actually feel a lot worse. I say worse, a lot more. So, and then you look at the highest growth segments, and we're seeing the highest growth in all of the non-building segments, right? Again, due to government spending and funding, like the IIJA. And one thing to note is that heavy civil market cycles are about 5 years. And so you generally see 5 years of incline and 5 years of a dip in that market. And it seems to us like we're just starting on the 5-year incline in heavy civil. And so then we pull out in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. We're seeing the largest spending in manufacturing at $14 billion, power at $12 billion over the next 5 years, and then commercial at $11 billion. So what's unique about these 3 states is that commercials actually takes up one of the largest shares of the market compared to the United States. And then you look at the highest growth segments, we're seeing conservation and development, and then water supply, as well as sewage and waste disposal at about 9% compound annual growth rate. Again, those heavy civil markets are expected to grow in mass. So the idea here is that if you're just looking at the monolithic forecasts and getting bummed out about that 2 to 3% decline, you're not thinking about it correctly. There's bulls and bears in every macroeconomic condition, and it depends on which markets you're serving and in what geographies. And so, we always get asked, is a recession here? Well, yeah. And then people ask us, well, when's the next expansion? Well, it's now. And the idea is that, again, bulls and bears coexist in any economic condition, but given any recession, there's always still going to be opportunities. So in terms of recession, 8 of the 15 predictive indicators are signaling recession. That's about 53% are saying that we're either in or going into a recession. And so that's still, still a little bit above half of the indicators saying yes, but not totally, the answer isn't totally yes. The main indicator really is the yield curve inverting. That's basically signaling investor confidence over the next few years. And then home sales are falling at the fastest rate since the Great Recession. However, some indicators are pointing green, like unemployment is historically low, GDP is up, oil prices are trending downward. So the current theory is that interest rates will stop increasing and stabilize when they reach around 4 to 5%, depending on inflation, resulting in a decrease in the amount of money available for borrowing, and CPI growth slowing in the first half of 2023, which will result in a weaker demand for jobs, inflation, and financial market challenges. And these factors will become more noticeable in the second half of 2023, with a decline in business activity and a drop in commodity prices like copper, oil, and steel. So as a result, the Federal Reserve will adjust towards accommodation, making it easier for people and businesses to borrow money. And this will cause money supply contraction to stop, the decrease in the amount of money available for borrowing to stop, not necessarily an increase in the amount of money available for borrowing to increase, but for the increase to stop, or the decrease to stop. Sorry, it's a lot of words. As a result, the yield curve will uninvert in late 2023. This is kind of what we're expecting. This is our theory. And so, long story short, we're expecting economic contraction in the second half of 2023. However, there's a lower likelihood that we see a deep recession than what we were expecting 4 to 6 months ago. And so, for pretty much all of history, a fundamental rule has been when single-family home construction slows, non-residential and non-building structures follow suit. Single-family homes follow the traditional business cycle more closely. And currently we're seeing a historic burn off of residential construction, particularly single-family homes. So should we be preparing for an economic contraction? It's going to depend, right? It depends on which markets we serve and where we are geographically. Overall, a non-residential slowdown may be offset by the growth in infrastructure, manufacturing, warehousing, basically all non-developer, all non-interest rate driven projects. So looking at the monolithic forecast, an economic recession could be offset by the growth in these segments. So again, decline is expected to be primarily developer driven and interest rate finance heavy segments. And one thing we know for sure is that demand for non-building structures and heavy civil is going to increase due to the IIJA. If it's $500 billion of new spending, with the majority of it being deployed by the end of this year and next year, this will dramatically increase demand for construction services in these sectors and could potentially offset, again, the overall construction industry contraction. So what does this mean for companies who aren't in these spaces? For non-residential and residential construction companies. Well, it means that it's going to be harder to find labor, because as a lot of these infrastructure projects come online, as a lot of these heavy civil construction projects begin, the labor pool is going to thin out in the other segments, because these projects are labor intensive and are going to be plentiful over the next few years. And so that's one of the challenges with increased government spending really across the board, is that despite throwing money into a segment in order to build more, if you look at a chart of the available labor pool, people are not only leaving the workforce in a record amount, but they're also just not entering the construction industry as they used to. And so there's going to be fewer people available as the spending of construction increases in these segments. So this is our idea of the new versus the old economy, and how the old economy, these are segments that are more tethered to economic headwinds or follow sociocultural trends like shopping malls and movie theaters. These will continue to decline. If you think about textiles and consumer manufacturing, it's too expensive in the United States to build any of that. People are offshoring that stuff. Offices, half of Americans work remote today, compared to 5% of Americans pre-COVID. And then you look at the new economy, and these segments are expected to grow regardless of economic conditions. For example, you think about mass transit. 90% of Americans live in cities today. Millennials drive 10% less than boomers. This increases demand of urban mass transit and heavy civil projects, non-building construction. And this also puts people further away from traditional food sources, which in turn increases demand in food and beverage manufacturing, because Americans are consuming more processed foods as a result. In 2000, half of overall caloric intake in the United States was processed foods. Today, 70% of Americans consume their daily calories of processed foods. 70% of their daily calories are of processed foods. And 2/3 of that comes from ultra-processed foods. And because there's a one-to-one relationship between ultra-processed food consumption and health issues, this will increase demand for the life sciences. Ultra-processed foods are associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and all-cause mortality. 60% of Americans are on maintenance prescriptions. Those are drugs you'd never get off of, and that amount is increasing. The number one prescribed drug is antidepressants, which 11% of Americans are prescribed. And there's a lack of manpower there's a lack of manpower in the life sciences to keep up with the amount of hospitals that need to be built. So you can build as many hospitals as you want and need, but you just don't have the nurses and doctors needed to fill them. So then you think about things like logistics. It's part of the new economy. Half of Americans grocery shop online. I know I do. Honestly, I get all my groceries online. After I'm finished traveling all week, every week, I just do a DoorDash and get all my groceries sent to me on a Friday night. It's pretty easy, and I don't see why anybody else goes to the grocery store anymore. I don't really get a kick out of shopping for toilet paper, but if you do, that's okay. E-commerce grew around 200% since 2015. And then, for example, you look at Home Depot, which is opening just warehouse. You can order something online and go pick it up. Pro and the consumer alike can just go pick up. There's no storefront. You don't walk in the Home Depot. You just pick up in front of this warehouse. Chick-fil-A is doing something similar with only drive-through locations. I just had some Chick-fil-A yesterday. I'm glad y'all have that over here. So these sectors are going to increase demand for data centers, because all of these relationships between shopping and warehouses and data governance. So all of that data needs to be stored somewhere, right? So we're expecting 175 zettabytes by the year 2025. A zettabyte is 1 terabyte. And if you don't know what that is, that's a lot of data, and it's got to go somewhere. That's a 61% compound annual growth rate, and half of that will be stored in data centers. And for for context, one hyperscale data center, that's enough to store a lot of data. It consumes enough power for about 600 homes. It's 200 to 400 terawatt hours, and which will, of course, increase demand for energy. And energy demand is increasing while transmission reliability is decreasing. There's been a 50% increase in demand since 1980, and 70% of transmission lines in the United States are over their half-life of 25 years old. So on that note, there's been over 180 large sustained outages in 2020 alone, while there were only less than 25 in the year 2000. And so our grid's becoming less reliable while the amount of energy needed is increasing. This has led to people thinking creatively and saying, hey, I need to get off the grid. I need to develop my own energy source. And they're building things called DERs, or distributed energy resources. These are small, localized, and modular energy resources, like a small nuke, believe it or not. And there was 78 gigawatts of DER capacity installed between 2017 and 2021 alone. And we're forecasting 175 gigawatts through 2026. So these are just examples of markets that will continue to grow regardless of macroeconomic headwinds. And despite there being a 2 to 3% contraction in the monolithic construction forecast, there will always be opportunities. It's a massive market, and this new economy will always provide growing opportunities. And so then you look at geography, and the single greatest indicator of construction activity is people. This map is showing interstate movement of people, and the green and red, the colors represent a 20-year trend, and the numbers there represent people moving out of state or into state between 2020 and 2021. Basically, what this is showing is that the two biggest losers of people were California and New York. Chicago alone has been losing about 50,000 people per year, which represents a massive exodus of construction activity. And we're seeing in 2022 U.S. Census Bureau data that since 2020, there's a mass exodus of Americans moving from the top 25 largest metro areas to more affordable mid to small size cities, because they're chasing a lower cost of living and higher quality of life. So construction demand is determined in large part by where the people are and where they're moving. So who here has labor problems? Labor problems. Anybody? Just two? Just two? Okay, a few more. We don't say we have labor problems because that kind of implies that there's a solution. This has been a challenge throughout all of history. The amount of people entering the construction force has been declining for as long as we can remember, and the people who are retiring have been increasing in volume for a number of years. Now, this is an image of article clippings all the way back from 1900 of people writing about their problems with labor, and so this has always been an issue, and it's an issue that isn't really going to go anywhere. So this is a chart showing employment in the United States. The orange line represents construction employment. The blue line is total non-farm. So that's everybody else, basically. And the idea that we're portraying here is that, before 2020, there were about 7.7 million construction workers in construction. And then you look at today, we have about 7.9. So there's really no more construction workers in the industry than there were pre-2020. It obviously took a dip from the COVID, and it's been hard to catch up even to those numbers, but it's likely not going to catch up to that pre-COVID trend. So basically, there are no more employees in construction today than before its peak in 2020. And there's also a gap between the people leaving the workforce and the people entering the workforce. So this chart here is showing the value. So the blue line is the value of persons per dollar. So the amount of people needed per dollar of construction put in place versus dollars per person, the amount of dollars going towards a single person, dollars per person. Yeah. And so we're seeing in the year 2005, there being a stark difference growing. So basically, construction is becoming more and more labor intensive. You need more people per dollar of construction put in place, while the value of each person's work is decreasing. And that gap is only widening. Does that make sense? So it's getting more expensive to build something while more people are required to build it. And this is due to increased project complexities, more complicated designs, more technology in buildings, more MEP, and it's due to the decreasing availability of skilled labor, the decreasing quality of designs, and compressed project schedules, just increasing project complexities and decreasing labor availability. And so, you could look at, this is the workforce participation rate. And you'll notice right away is that, it's been decreasing since the year 2000. Obviously, 2020 saw a massive decline, and it hasn't recovered and likely won't recover for a while. And you could say, well, people just aren't working enough. Okay, and your generation, millennials, and look, I'll be the first to say it. I agree. I've got a lot of buddies who just don't work as hard as they could. So, you hear that a lot. Nobody wants to work anymore. Have you ever said that? I say it all the time. I hear it all the time. Who's ever said that? Come on, show of hands. All right, you already know what to do. Y'all are pretty smart. Here's some article clippings back to the year 1900. Every 10 years, there's an article clipping of a business owner writing about how nobody wants to work anymore. Workforce participation has been decreasing for as long as history, and it's only going to continue decreasing in workforce availability. So yeah, my favorite one in there is there's some good ones. There's some pretty funny ones in there. Yeah, nobody wants to work anymore. 1979, nobody wants to work anymore by disgusted businessman. I get it. Yeah, it's a real issue, and it's only getting worse. And so what I was talking about when I said that there's a gap between people entering the workforce and exiting the workforce is this. These are the age demographics of construction workers. I'm sorry, you can't see it as well. But basically the green line is Gen Z, or 16 to 24 years old. The blue line is millennials, 25 to 34 years old. And then the red line is my dad's generation, 35 to 54 years old. And then the yellow line is boomers, 55 years and up. And so boomers traditionally have always been the fastest growing segment of construction workers, the fastest growing demographic of construction workers. There have been more boomers entering the workforce than any other generation for a long time. But if you look at pretty much every other age group, there's a downward trend. Not only is there a downward trend, so there's less people from those age groups entering in to the workforce than boomers, but there's a huge gap between the people exiting the workforce, boomers, and the people who are supposed to replace them. So that's a problem, because once this generation, the 55-year and up, the boomers are not working in construction anymore, there's going to be fewer and fewer people to replace them. And so the labor issues are just compounded and compounded and compounded. There's so many issues about why it's getting worse and worse, and everybody's tired of hearing about it, but it's a real issue. And so, well, I can't leave it at that. So companies will have to dig deeper in their labor pool. They'll have to look to the younger generations to find people to replace the superintendents who've been in your company for a long time. I work with a lot of companies that wouldn't be around if it wasn't for their legacy superintendents who know the jobs, they know the materials, they've been putting this work up, they've been putting this work in place for a long time, And the office and the project management staff are just kind of sitting on their hind and saying, just do what you got to do. And it works until those superintendents retire. Then there's no more company. And so what do you do when that happens? So how we advise clients to approach this is keep score, that third component of what a contractor does according to Doc Fales. Keep score so that you have the data to determine, to tell like a younger guy that you're trying to train up, hey, this is how much you got to put in place, and this is how you do it, and this is what Superintendent Steve did, and this is how he did it. And so we need to be bringing up this younger generation. We need to be looking in the younger generations and trusting them a bit more to be able to take those spots. And there's a lot of ways we can do this. So we ran a study, FMI ran a study in 2020. We surveyed about 400 companies and their CEOs, owners, C-suite, and operations staff, project managers, and field staff. And it was namely about problems with talent in the industry and issues and how it's affecting them. So 93% of respondents indicated that they're experiencing talent shortages. That is up from 89% in 2017. And half of those respondents indicated that the talent shortages are having a high to severe impact on their ability to execute projects successfully. A third of those respondents indicated that managerial and non-managerial field positions are the most difficult positions to fill. So they're hard to hire for. And a quarter, so 28% of those respondents indicated that field leaders, superintendents are retiring in the next 5 years. That's their entire staff of superintendents. So it's a real issue. Everybody feels it. You're validated in how hard it is to find work and to keep work, to find workers and to keep workers. So how can we staff projects with limited construction workers entering the workforce while much of our staff are retiring or leaving? So one of the ways that we can prepare for an economic slowdown is by asking ourselves, are we playing a good defense as well as a good offense? An offense would be our hiring strategy. A defense would be, how do we hold on to our people and train them the best? So are we developing who we have in our organizations today? Are we developing our next generation of field and operations leaders? Do we have a formal budget allocated to training and development? These are all things we should be asking ourselves. Do they have a clear career path? Do they know where they're going to be in a few years? Are they excited for that? I mentioned earlier, I worked for GC in Louisiana. They had a really interesting talent development program where you went through a rotation. You started in pre-construction, you went into the field, you worked under a superintendent, and then you worked under a project manager. And at the end of those 3 years, you pitched to the owner of the company. When you're a 21-year-old kid, this is kind of scary. I might look like I'm pretty comfortable public speaking, but I'm pretty scared doing this right here. But imagine if I was 21 years old and talking to an owner of the company that I work for, right? So they put a lot of pressure on you, and it put a lot of ownership in that company is known for having the best talent and development program in Louisiana. So much so that I was willing to take less money, work for them, just so I can get trained the best. So is our field receiving the right support from our project management team? Are we staffing projects appropriately? Where do we put our teams? Do we have certain crews that are A players, and then where do we put our not so A player teams? Do we put our A player teams on the best projects? Probably not. You want to put your B team, people maybe you hire from the neck down, on projects that are going to be an easy win, and then your A team you're going to put on harder projects. This is kind of why we don't advise. A lot of contractors ask us, how do you rank superintendents? You don't, because there's no way to do it. And if you ranked them by margin gain faded on project or direct cost overrun, underrun on a project, you're going to get all your A players scoring the lowest score. So is our field receiving the right support from our project management team in the office? People who indicated that they have field leaders who indicated that they have adequate support from the office of project management teams have a higher net promoter score. And this net promoter score that we generated is just an aggregate of questions related to how likely you are to stay in the company, how likely you are to recommend someone work for this company, how likely you are to stick around and train the next generation, that kind of stuff. So people who indicated that they receive enough support from their project management staff and office staff had a higher net promoter score. So they're more likely to stick around and perform better. So are we taking on just enough projects to be productive and profitable? You know, one of the things I've seen, one of the partners in the firm that I work with a lot advise clients who are struggling with margins is take on less work. You guys are spread too thin. Doc Fales, founder of FMI, had these platitudes, and one of my favorite platitudes is revenue kills, profit thrills. Whatever you got to do to increase that profit margin, even if it involves taking on less work, that's one of the most important factors. So this is some math, a lot of numbers here, too much for me at least. And the idea here is that part of that survey, we figured out the estimated voluntary turnover rate of project managers and field leaders. So that's about 21% of the average contractor loses about 21% of their project management and leadership staff. And these numbers are based on the assumption of a company of the size of 250 people. So we estimated that it costs about 33% of a salary to replace that person. And so if you're a company of 250 people, you have an estimated voluntary turnover rate like an average contractor does of about 21%, then you're spending $800,000 a year to replace these people. Now, what if you could reduce that estimated voluntary turnover rate to about 12.5%? You know, that number drops down to $430,000. So you're saving around $300,000 to $400,000 a year, which, you know, maybe that's not a whole lot. For some companies it is, but there are other hidden costs associated with that loss, those loss of employees, that voluntary turnover. There's a loss of knowledge. You know, people who run projects well, figure out they have a better deal elsewhere, you lose those people. You lose that knowledge. There's a loss of morale. Turnover is high. They have to work in all these different teams all the time, never get to build rapport with one another. That reduces morale. And there's a loss of customers. Some customers only want to work with some project managers or some field teams. So how do we reduce that estimated voluntary turnover rate? How do we play a good defense as well as a good offense? And there's a lot of insights that we got from the survey. This is a quote from Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Group. Train people well enough so they can leave. Train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so that they don't have to. They don't want to, sorry. Let me say that again. Train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't want to. So one of the questions we asked was, does your company provide leadership and management training? So for the companies that answered yes, there was an 11% higher net promoter score of project management and field teams operations staff. Again, that net promoter score is an aggregate of questions like how likely you are to stick around, how likely you are to recommend this company to your friends to work at, how likely you are to train the next generation of employees. And we found that there's an inverse relationship between net promoter score and the impact from talent shortages. Meaning, the higher the aggregate of a company's net promoter score was, the happier people are with your company, the less perceived impact that company has in the C-suite. So one of the questions we asked was, on a scale from 1 to 10, what is the quality of your leadership and management training? To follow up that yes or no question of, does your company offer leadership and management training? And we found that higher quality of training is directly correlated with less impact from talent shortages. So if you put this on a chart, with the quality of training increasing, the impact of talent shortages is decreasing. So we also asked, how well does your office support your work in the field? That increased net promoter score by 40% if that person indicated an average answer and above 6 to 10. And then culture. Culture is something that, you know, some people scoff at as not as important because it's kind of a soft skill. How do you build a culture? How do you instill cultural family values in your organization. It's hard to do. It's definitely a skill. It's definitely a talent. But organizations that had a higher aggregate rating of their culture, people who indicated that their company has a healthy culture of, average and above, indicated that those companies indicated that there's less impact from talent shortages. So these are things we should be thinking about. How do we lower that involuntary turnover rate, and how do we become that destination contractor? This is a term that somebody I worked with uses a lot. We want to become this destination contractor, somewhere that people want to work at, somewhere that kids out of trade school are like, that's the company I want to work for. I'll take less money to go work for them because I know I'll get trained well. I'll get put on the right projects. I'll work with these folks who have a reputation in the industry. And then maybe one day I'll go open my own company. So this is what we need to aspire to play a good defense and hold on to the people we have now and train the people coming up through the organization, So to sum things up, these are basically the elements that we should be thinking about. Should we be preparing for an economic recession? Again, it depends on which segments you're serving, where we are geographically. Bulls and bears coexist in any given economic conditions. That's something we got to remember and hold on to. Think about the old economy versus the new economy. Are we working in these new economy segments that will be almost guaranteed to grow despite economic conditions? And then follow the people. Where are the people moving to? Where are the people now? Because they're the number one predictor of construction activity. So this idea of less for more, right? We're going to be building less for the cost of more. We should develop scenarios based on a 10 to 15% increase, sustained increase in costs. And we should have a continued focus on controlling material price escalations and supply chain disruptions. These are things that we should continue to think about and worry about and plan for. So finally, it goes back to recruiting who you have now, playing a good defense as well as an offense. Recruit the people you have within your organization. You're going to need to search deeper in your work pool, younger in age, and bring those folks up. Become that destination contractor that everybody wants to work at. Build a healthy culture, and then you will objectively have less impact from the talent shortages. So finally, if you want to learn more about this, we just started, FMI just started a podcast. I always thought there was a lack of good podcasts in the construction industry. We just started one. Our first episode's out. It's called Built In, FMI's podcast for the built environment. There's a QR code if you want to get to it. The first one's up on the website now. Other than that, I'm Cain Menard with FMI, and I really appreciate your time today. And I think we're going to do questions.
Anyone has any?
Oh yeah, if anybody has any questions, please.
Oh, hold on.
Sorry, we need a
You have a question, speak into the microphone so that the virtual audience can also.
that little thing is a microphone.
First of all, thanks so much for what you've showed us. How do you see technology and robots kind of changing and maybe replacing some of that workforce? I've been in some meetings lately.
Yeah.
And how do you foresee that happening, or how does that
So
FMI?
technology and robots. I love this conversation because I'm a big nerd. I got my degree in my master's degree focused in data analytics. And so I think a lot about construction technology, software, and in the future of that. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to utilize technology and help us increase margins while reducing risk associated with resources like people, materials, and stuff like that. I think it's going to be less obvious, just based on what I read. I actually write articles about it at FMI. It's going to be less obvious than like a robot walking around and using a hammer drill to drill holes. It's going to be more like, how do you use technology and data analytics to project productivity on projects and determine when's the best time to order something. For example, we have a contractor out of Canada who's a metal building erector, and they use RFID tags on their structural steel. And they came up with the optimal amount of time for structural steel to be on site. things like that, that's going to really make a huge difference in construction, but it's not going to be as obvious as robots walking around. Any more questions?
I do anything with it or just talk to it? Well, thanks for your presentation. Very informative and so much in there that makes my mind start churning, my brain with regards to the labor force in particular.
Sure.
You know, just from many years experience in the HR side and handling labor force issues.
Right.
It does seem as though, you know, we have to go get them, especially our millennials. Where are they? And just like if you're selling anything, recruiting is selling. So go where they are, find them, get them, promote them.
Right.
The high schools are struggling. You know, they're struggling with teachers and so many other issues. And then there are, you know, like your Central 9 schools who are embedding healthcare regimented classes into the high school. And so if construction's not doing that now,
Right.
that could be an avenue to really start bringing those folks up into the labor force, you know, because I think your labor force is working at Chipotle. They're working at
Right.
Arby's and they don't know what they don't know. And they don't know what a great gift it would be to work in construction.
Right.
And so I don't know what your thoughts might be around any of those things to support the initiatives they could take further to start gaining that labor force trend.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm curious about what y'all do to attract talent, because you mentioned that y'all have made a big effort in attracting talent, playing a good offense and going to where the younger kids are, the younger generations are. So what do you do in particular to do that? Do you go to high schools or?
Well, I spent 8 years in construction and then I spent 20 years in healthcare. We would go find them and we would train them and we would put them in school and train them and prepare them to come into our workforce in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Whether it's through high school or your apprenticeship programs or things like that, that is directly tied to the construction industry or healthcare industry.
That's really good. I mean,
and we would bring them off the street and hire them. And they were some of your best workers, because when you give someone a gift of a great job, they're more loyal than the ones who come knocking on your door and don't really want to be there anyway.
right. That's awesome. I love to hear things like that. You know, we for example, one example that I love to talk about is I work with an electrical contractor out of Chicago, and they have a really unique program in that they basically build a school in their fab shop where you have like a wall of switch panels and you have different tables, different areas where kids will come and learn under the guidance of a superintendent or a foreman how to do whatever it is they're doing, electrical termination and building a switchboard.
Yeah.
It's things like that that can make a huge difference, but it feels like there's going to have to be a lot of grassroots efforts from the construction companies in ways like that.
Or in a generation of 20% or less than your traditional family model.
Right.
They're struggling to stay off the street a lot of the time and survive and figure out how they can be great and do whatever they need to do to support their families in the future and create. And you know, I think their mindset's a little depends. Every generation's different when it regards to, you know, what's going to drive them into a particular workforce and thrive.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. And that kind of goes into that cultural piece, you know, like
Mhm.
how do we build a culture that people want to not only work at, but feel like they're a part of a family?
Yeah, I have some family who work in construction and they were at my house Sunday and they were talking about the different, they were talking about the conversation was around their retirement 401k plan match. And so it mattered to them, you know, that kind of stuff matters. You know, the youngest one is 20 and he's in construction and he's thinking about that stuff. So
Right.
I was really fascinated with hearing their conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Thank you for questions. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, just curious to see, hear your comments about any trends that you see in unions and apprenticeship programs.
Yeah, unions and apprenticeship programs. You know, that's something that I don't have a ton of exposure to. Just by nature of being from Louisiana, there's not a whole lot of union activity in in that area of the country. But, you know, I wonder if anybody else has encountered any trends or changes in unions and apprenticeship programs. Anything to note? I don't know. What about you? What are you thinking? What prompted the question?
Yeah, so I guess what prompted the question is just there's some incentives out there in some of the spending bills, Inflation Reduction Act, that are incentivizing apprenticeship programs.
Right.
So that's one of the things I'm just wondering out in the industry,
Yeah.
you know, how many of those programs there are.
You know, that's a really good question. And yeah, if you'd like to follow up with me, I can connect you with somebody who has a lot of experience dealing with that. Sure. Is there any more questions? Great. Well, it looks like everybody's enjoying your meal. I'll let you do that. Thank you so much for coming and for your time today. Yeah. One more question. He's gonna just hold. Okay, all right. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
It's just on the top.
Okay. Good afternoon. I know not to get in the way before a good lunch is served, but let me be brief. My name's Scott Chisholm, practice leader for the state of Indiana. We are a full service brokerage firm on the commercial lines, employee benefit, personal lines, retirement side. So anything that can get you in trouble or protect and insure you, we can help with. Cain shared up front that the platitudes for contractors include 3 things. Anyone remember what those things were? Get work, do work, and keep score. Okay. When Ian, who does a fantastic job of preparing for an event like this, Ian says there's 3 things that make people happy when they come to a conference like this. Anyone knows what those 3 things are? Say it again. Feed them is one. What else? Educate them is 2. And then my personal favorite is give them prizes. And for that reason, here comes some trivia for you. I wrote these down on the fly. First one. This is a annual award. This is our 6th year doing this with Barnes Denig and Michaelis and Frost Brown Todd. And so as long as we don't screw it up, we'll do it again same time next year. Who traveled the furthest distance to be here today? Cincinnati does not count. Who wants to start the bidding? And Louisiana does not count either. Denver doesn't count. Who else? Who made the drive over today? Tom Woodison is a 90-mile drive from Terre Haute. Anyone beat 90 miles besides that? Okay. All right. I have a gift card for you. I'll get that one to you. Number two. Inside the USI folder, not to bore you with insurance stuff over lunch, inside that folder, there is a 2023 market outlook. So to the degree that you are involved in the insurance decision at your organization, you'll find some tidbits in there that may be compelling and informative to the financial decision makers at the company. On pages 4 and 5, it projects some rate projections for property, casualty, work comp, and page 38 is a construction one-pager on the outlook of construction, a lot of the stuff Cain talked about today. In 2022, how many billion-dollar weather and climate events were there in the United States? Last year, how many billion-dollar weather and climate events were there in the United States? Hurricane Ian was one of those at $65 billion. How many were there that were exceeded $1 billion? More than 5, Patricia. Who else? Less than 70.
More than 5, less than 70. We're getting close, y'all.
25 is a little bit high, but we'll give you the gift card. The answer is 20. And so the reason I bring that up on page 4 and 5, when you look at those rate projections, there is a hardening in the market happening. And it's happening because a lot of those billion-dollar weather and climate events are happening now, and there's less capacity in the marketplace. So when you get a chance to do some light reading, check that out, see how that applies to you on the liability, work comp side, auto, property, all things that you insure. Okay, so gift card for our guest 25. Our final trivia question today, and I'll introduce Danette here in a second. Cain Menard graduated from Louisiana Lafayette. Name me another alum of Louisiana Lafayette.
Brian Goodry.
Is that someone we would know? Was he? Can anyone be the Yankees pitcher, Brian Goodry? Cain, who's the most famous alum as a Raging Cajun? I was looking for Richard Simmons. Richard Simmons was a grad of Louisiana Lafayette. That's it. We're thrilled to be here hosting. Danette Beck is our national construction practice leader for USI. So I'm gonna let Danette say a few words to enlighten you all.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so proud to be here to see all of you in person today. I'm going to be even briefer than Scott because I don't want to be the one that is invading your lunchtime schedule here today. But I do want to thank everyone for coming out today. We need y'all's voices so that we can continue to innovate and drive market for y'all as you are continuing to grow. We do a lot of work with FMI and our business partners in order to drive innovations from a risk management strategy standpoint. So when you do take a look at the construction outlook that I put into the folder, that was heavily based upon the information that FMI and like corporations provide to us so that we can have a business conversation with you and not an insurance risk management or surety conversation with you. So again, we thank everyone for coming out today. Feel free to reach out to any of our USI colleagues that are here today or myself. I will give you my cell phone number. It's 914-548-7800. It's on 24/7, 365, just as y'all are. So please feel free to reach out to any of us and we're here to help. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks all.